Hey folks, welcome to this week's video. It'll be on Harrison Bergeron, our final short story before we dive into our full-length novels for the semester. Before we get started on discussing the short story though, I did want to make an announcement for the class. We are looking for someone to come forward to volunteer to share their notes. I made a quick announcement on the top of our main Canvas page. Please reach out to me. If you're willing to do this, it'd be a great help, yeah, especially sooner rather than later. So we are looking for a note taker. Please volunteer. That'd be very helpful. Okay, so we're going to make this video a little quicker than normal because I'm really interested in you all discussing our questions for the week within the groups. Okay, so I'm just going to give a little bit of information about the short story and hopefully some guiding questions in addition to your discussion questions to see what you all think. Okay, so Vonnegut wrote this story in 1961. I'm just going to say a little bit about the author. If you haven't heard of Kurt Vonnegut, he is famous for mid to late century, 20th century, writing a lot critically about things like the American dream and critical of government. He's one of the kind of standard white guy dystopian authors who feels like, you know, the privilege and individuality is being suppressed by government forces and stuff like this. So a lot of classic US white guy dystopian themes going on through his satire and speculative fiction, and Harrison Bergeron is no exception. So here's our, this is kind of more of the classic dystopian that if you heard about a class on dystopian literature, here's what you might have thought of. So writing in 1961, we get Harrison Bergeron. One of the reasons that also I selected this text is here we get our final tool for analysis before going into our full-length novels, right? So with Utopia and Le Guin, we've kind of been building what to look for, what kind of analyses to approach text with. For this novel, for this short story, I'd like us to approach this with an eye towards what makes something a dystopia in fact, okay? So it's pretty blatant in this short story, I think, and so hopefully it'll get us in the rhythm. So from my perspective, to make something a dystopia, there's a value that in some way is going wrong in a society. Okay, so an author actually is making an argument or is being provocative or suggestive with either how a society is understanding a value, right? So there's an issue of like a definition or a disagreement about what is a value, right? So that could be something like happiness, equality, freedom, right? So not disagreeing that this concept, that this value should be important to a society, but you're understanding it wrong, right? So a dystopia can be made either by that, like, okay, you're starting to get it, but you've misunderstood this value. Or another thing that can make a dystopia is maybe you're understanding that value right, but you've put it into your society wrong. Okay, so it could be a structural problem or a problem of understanding. Okay, so I think trying to analyze a dystopia with this tool is also helpful. So what is a society misvaluing is one of the things that we should be analyzing by reading governments, societies that have gone so wrong, right? It helps us to kind of have a structure of a question to get into something, right? To get into a story. So it's usually pretty obvious when you're reading a dystopia that it's a dystopia, right? Things have gone to hell, right? But the next question is like, well, what made this go to hell, right? And thinking of dystopias with that structure is often very helpful. And Harrison Bergeron is a nice in there, okay? I think this text is kind of perfectly suited to this question. And so that's going to be one of the things that we discuss and that the questions are geared towards in your discussion this week. Okay, so the story. We open in probably the US in 2081. Okay, so that's a little over 100 years after the short story was written. And the opening paragraph is kind of telling and sets up a tone for the story, so you can kind of think about what that did for you. From my perspective, it's interesting because it sets up some kind of tension that might start bearing fruit throughout the rest. So the opening really emphasizes that finally everyone was equal, right? So I think that finally does a lot because it's suggesting to me that there was a period of time that was pretty bad because of something about inequality, right? So we get a feel for this society that something went so drastically wrong that this drastic situation felt necessary, okay? So that's kind of a tension that's set up. Further, just right off the bat, it's like people are finally equal. But then also it emphasizes pretty quick, but that didn't solve everything, right? There's still dreary Aprils and things like this, right? So it's quick to say something finally happened that was good. We solved a really big problem, right? So it suggested that inequality is a really big problem. It also tells us in particular what kinds of things are equal now. So it gives us an understanding of equality, right? And it emphasizes that didn't solve everything. Okay, so those are the three tones. Great. Those are the three tones that we start with right off the bat, right? So there's tension there, and there's suggestions of what this book is committed to, or like what's being played with, right? Understandings of equality, understandings of what a society can do well or not well, right? And it's a satire, so it's not that can be read just on the surface, right? These ideas will be played with. Okay, so just in that opening, I think it opens with the questions to explore throughout the rest of the reading, right? Okay, so I encourage you to think about what the commitments are, especially with, well, what have they made equal, right? Is that your idea of equality? That will be a theme throughout the discussion questions. But also because this focuses on equality, and then the story is told through this kind of lens, like, oh, look at all of these things that, for instance, the handicapper general and her, the people who work for her, what can we see about the other features of society besides just, okay, we're making everybody equal in particular ways? What is revealed, we see through Hazel and George, most of the society. What can we say about the rest of society? How is this set up, right? So there was this big problem that got fixed. What was necessary to fix it? Was that necessary? Has something been fixed? One of the interesting questions that I come to this story with is everybody equal now? Think about the structure of the society. What has been accomplished? What do you know about the structure of this society? What kind of equality has been achieved, even with what the story says has been made equal? And then also take a step back from the conceit of the story and say, like, what do I know about this government, the citizenry, all the structure? Would you call this an equal society? Okay, so what does the government care about? What do the citizens care about? Yeah, and so these are the things that I want you to kind of think about maybe as you're reading. If you've watched this video after you've read, maybe consider that before you hit the discussion boards. But yeah, so these are some background ideas I'd like you to consider. The story is called Harrison Bergeron. That's the name of a character. Many people read this, especially for the first time, and are like, hell yeah, Harrison Bergeron. He's a badass and an awesome guy. And that's a considered view as well. So I'd also encourage you to think about what your response is to him and why he's the title, right? What are some, with most of our short stories, I'd like us to think about what alternative titles would be and what would change about the story just if we kept the story the exact same and titled it something different, and then what you could change slightly about the story, and then everyone would want it to be a different title, right? Okay, so those are the things that I have for this week, but I do want to say just one more thing before the video stops, because I'm giving you a light reading next week. In fact, no reading next week, because 2 weeks from now, you have your heaviest reading of the entire semester, okay? So between now and basically 2.5 weeks from now, you need to read 100 pages, okay? It is doable. It is a readable 100 pages, but I wanted to tell you now, like the minute you stop reading Harrison Bergeron, either if you're a paced reader, start reading the Q, or come up with a reading schedule to read the Q. It comes out to 40 pages a week when it's a novel that is in the workload that we're supposed to give you. But it's why I didn't give you reading next week. I just want to give you a heads up. I'm going to make an announcement as well. Start reading the Q. If you try to start reading the Q in the 4 days before that week, it's going to be hell. Don't do that. Okay? Start reading the Q. All right. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns. It's Harrison Bergeron week. I'd get Harrison Bergeron out of the way and start reading the Q. If you can do note taking, please volunteer for that as well. I'll be putting up announcements for due dates for the next few weeks to try to get the structure of the semester ingrained on us so people won't miss deadlines. Have a good week.